I brought her roses the night I found out she'd been destroying me. Ethan Parker stood outside room 1247 with 24 red roses and a marriage he thought was bulletproof. He'd driven 3 hours to surprise his wife on her business trip, only to hear laughter spilling from behind her hotel door, followed by sounds that turned his blood to ice. In that hallway, with his heart hammering against his ribs, Ethan didn't just lose his wife. He lost the illusion that love and loyalty were the same thing. But what he didn't know yet, what would unravel in the weeks to come, was that Lauren's betrayal wasn't just personal, it was calculated, strategic, part of a pattern that had destroyed others before him. And this time, someone was finally paying attention. If you want to see how far the truth can travel, stay with me until the end. Like this story, and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to know how far these words can reach. Ethan Parker's hands were shaking, not from fear, not from anger, from the sheer weight of holding 24 red roses while his entire world collapsed 6 feet away from him, behind a hotel door he should never have knocked on. He'd planned this surprise for 2 weeks. Lauren had been working late so often, traveling for client meetings, attending leadership summits, building her career at Meridian Global Consulting. Ethan admired that about her. She was ambitious, driven. She'd always said their marriage worked because they both respected each other's dreams. So when she mentioned her trip to Chicago for a 3-day corporate strategy session, Ethan saw an opportunity. He'd finish his project early, drive up after work, surprise her with roses and reservations at that Italian place she loved. Maybe they'd finally have the conversation they'd been avoiding, the one about whether they were ready to start a family. But now, standing in the carpeted silence of the 14th floor at the Riverview Grand Hotel, Ethan wasn't thinking about family. He wasn't thinking about Italian food or romance or any of the things that had filled his head during the drive. He was thinking about the voice he'd just heard through the door. A man's voice. Low, intimate, followed by Lauren's laughter, the kind of laughter that made Ethan's stomach turn, because he recognized it. It was the same laugh she used to give him, back when things were still new between them. Ethan stepped back from the door. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from his best friend Jamie. "Did you surprise her yet? Let me know how it goes, man." Ethan stared at the screen until it went dark. Then he turned and walked back down the hall, past the ice machine, past the elevator, all the way to the emergency stairwell at the end of the corridor. He slipped inside, let the door close behind him, and sat down on the cold concrete steps. The roses were still in his hand. He set them down carefully, as if they were made of glass. And then, for the first time in his adult life, Ethan Parker had no idea what to do next. He didn't go home that night. Instead, he checked into another room on the 10th floor under his own name, using the corporate card he kept for work travel. The front desk clerk smiled pleasantly and handed him a key card. She didn't ask why his eyes were red. She didn't ask why he looked like he'd just witnessed something unspeakable. Ethan rode the elevator down in silence, walked into his room, and locked the door behind him. Then he sat on the edge of the bed and tried to breathe. His mind kept replaying the sound of that voice. The laughter. The way the door had been slightly ajar, just enough for sound to slip through. He hadn't seen anything. He hadn't needed to. The truth had been right there, wrapped in the intimacy of 2 people who thought they were alone. Ethan pulled out his phone and opened Lauren's last text to him, sent that morning. "Miss you already. Can't wait to be home Sunday. Love you." 3 little words that now felt like poison. He scrolled further back. Her messages over the past few months had been consistent, loving, supportive, full of little updates about work and reminders to eat dinner and jokes about how messy he left the kitchen. Nothing had seemed wrong. Nothing had seemed off. But now, looking at those messages with fresh eyes, Ethan started to notice things. The business trips had increased. 3 in the last 2 months alone. She'd started going to the gym more often, early mornings, late evenings. She'd bought new clothes, changed her perfume, small things. Things he'd attributed to her upcoming promotion, to the stress of her job, to normal life changes. Things that now felt like evidence. Ethan set his phone down and stared at the hotel room wall. He wasn't angry yet. He was too numb for anger. What he felt was something quieter, something colder. a bone-deep sense of betrayal that made his hands feel foreign, like they belonged to someone else. He thought about confronting her, about marching back upstairs, pounding on that door, demanding answers, making her look him in the eye and admit what she'd done. But something stopped him. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the part of him that still couldn't quite believe this was real. Or maybe it was something deeper, a quiet, calculating voice in the back of his mind that said, "If you confront her now, she'll lie. She'll make excuses. She'll twist the truth until you're the one apologizing." Ethan had been a litigation consultant for 7 years. He knew how people behaved when they were caught. They lied. They deflected. They protected themselves first and worried about the damage later. If he was going to do this, he needed to be smart. He needed proof. The next morning, Ethan didn't leave Chicago. He called his office and told them he was taking a personal day. Then he went down to the hotel lobby, bought a coffee, and sat in one of the leather armchairs near the entrance where he had a clear view of the elevators. He didn't have to wait long. At 8:47 a.m., Lauren stepped out of the elevator. She wasn't alone. The man beside her was tall, mid-40s, with graying hair and an expensive suit. He carried himself with the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. Ethan recognized him immediately. Marcus Hale, Senior VP of Client Strategy at Meridian Global. Lauren had mentioned him before, always in passing. "Marcus thinks we should pivot the campaign. Marcus wants me to lead the Denver project." They walked through the lobby together, not touching, but close enough that anyone watching would know. There was an ease between them, a familiarity. Lauren laughed at something Marcus said, and Ethan's chest tightened. They stopped near the hotel restaurant. Marcus said something Ethan couldn't hear, and Lauren nodded. Then Marcus reached out, just briefly, just enough, and touched her lower back before heading toward the parking garage. Lauren watched him go. Then she turned and walked back toward the elevators, her phone already in her hand. Ethan stayed perfectly still, hidden behind his newspaper, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might crack his ribs. Lauren didn't see him. She stepped into the elevator, still smiling, and disappeared. Ethan waited until the doors closed. Then he pulled out his phone and started taking notes. Over the next 48 hours, Ethan became someone he didn't recognize. He followed Lauren, not closely. He was careful, strategic. He stayed far enough back that she'd never notice, but close enough to document everything. He watched her attend meetings. He watched her have lunch with Marcus at a cafe 2 blocks from the hotel. He watched them linger over coffee, leaning in close, their conversation easy and intimate in a way that made Ethan's stomach turn. He took photos, timestamps, location data. And when Lauren texted him that evening, "Long day, missing you, can't wait to be home tomorrow," Ethan responded the way he always did, "Miss you too, drive safe." He felt nothing when he sent it. That night, Ethan sat in his hotel room and went through Lauren's digital footprint with the kind of methodical precision he used at work. He logged into their shared cloud account, something they'd set up years ago for photos and documents, and started digging. What he found made him physically ill. Travel receipts that didn't match her work calendar, hotel reservations under her name in cities she'd never mentioned visiting, a folder labeled personal that contained photos he'd never seen. Lauren at a beach resort, Lauren at a rooftop bar, Lauren smiling in ways that looked too relaxed, too unguarded. And in some of those photos, just at the edge of the frame, was Marcus. Ethan kept digging. He found text threads she'd deleted from her phone but hadn't scrubbed from the cloud backup. Messages that went back 6 months. Messages that started professional and slowly, methodically, turned into something else. "You looked incredible today. I can't stop thinking about you. This is dangerous, but I don't care anymore." And then more recently, "After the promotion goes through, we'll figure it out. I promise." Ethan read that message 3 times. After the promotion goes through. This wasn't just an affair. This was a plan. Lauren wasn't going to leave him out of guilt or passion or reckless emotion. She was going to wait. She was going to secure her career advancement first, lock in the raise, the title, the leverage, and then she'd walk away clean. She was using him as a safety net while she built a new life with someone else. Ethan closed his laptop. He sat in the dark hotel room listening to the hum of the air conditioner and felt something shift inside him. The numbness was gone. What replaced it was clarity. Yet, When Ethan finally drove home Sunday afternoon, he didn't say a word about Chicago. Lauren arrived an hour after him, looking tired but content. She kissed him at the door, dropped her bags in the hallway, and went straight to the shower. "How was the trip?" Ethan asked when she came back downstairs, her hair still damp. "Exhausting," Lauren said, pouring herself a glass of wine. "But productive. I think we're finally getting traction on the client retention strategy. Marcus was really impressed with my presentation." "That's great," Ethan said evenly. "I'm proud of you." Lauren smiled. "Thanks, babe. I'm just glad to be home." She sat down next to him on the couch, curling into his side the way she always did. Ethan put his arm around her, felt the warmth of her body against his, and said nothing. Later that night, as Lauren slept beside him, Ethan lay awake staring at the ceiling. He wasn't going to confront her, not yet, because confrontation gave her control. It gave her the chance to spin the story, to cry, to apologize, to beg for forgiveness she didn't deserve. And Ethan wasn't interested in forgiveness. He was interested in the truth, all of it. Over the next 3 weeks, Ethan became a ghost in his own life. He went to work. He came home. He had dinner with Lauren. He smiled when she talked about her day. He listened when she complained about office politics. He played the role of supportive husband so well that Lauren never noticed the distance growing between them. But in the spaces she didn't see, the early mornings before she woke up, the late nights after she went to bed, Ethan was building a case. He hired a private investigator, not some shady character from a noir film, but a former federal agent named Catherine Riggs, who specialized in corporate misconduct and infidelity cases. She was expensive, professional, and discreet. "I need everything," Ethan told her during their first meeting at a coffee shop downtown. "Travel records, financial transactions, communication logs. I need to know how long this has been going on and how deep it goes." Catherine nodded, making notes on her tablet. "And the other party? Marcus Hale?" "Him too," Ethan said. "I want to know if this is a pattern, if he's done this before." Catherine looked up. "You think he has?" "I don't know," Ethan admitted, "but something about this feels practiced, like he knew exactly what he was doing." Catherine's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, maybe, or confirmation. "I'll start pulling records," she said. "Give me 2 weeks." But 12 days later, Catherine called him. "We need to meet," she said, "in person." They met at the same coffee shop. This time, Catherine brought a folder. She slid it across the table without preamble. "Marcus Hale has been with Meridian Global for 11 years. In that time, he's had at least 4 documented relationships with subordinates. 2 of them ended in quiet resignations. 1 ended in a settlement that included a strict NDA. The 4th is your wife." Ethan opened the folder. Inside were personnel files, emails, financial records, enough documentation to paint a very clear picture. "The company knew?" Ethan asked. "The company protected him," Catherine corrected. "Marcus brings in major clients. He's untouchable as long as he keeps the revenue flowing. HR has buried complaints before. They'll bury this one too if they get the chance." Ethan stared at the documents, his mind racing. "What about Lauren?" he asked quietly. "Does she know about the others?" Catherine hesitated. "I don't think so. From what I can tell, Marcus has a pattern. He targets women who are ambitious, hardworking, on the edge of a major promotion. He offers mentorship, access, influence. By the time they realize what's happening, they're in too deep to walk away without damaging their careers." "So she's a victim," Ethan said flatly. "She's complicit," Catherine said. "But yes, he's done this before. She hasn't." Ethan closed the folder. For a long moment he didn't speak. Then he looked up at Catherine and said, "I want all of it. Every record, every email, every piece of evidence you can find. I'm not just ending my marriage, I'm ending him." Catherine didn't smile, but there was something like approval in her eyes. "Understood," she said. That night, Lauren came home excited. "Guess what?" she said, practically bouncing as she set her bag down. "I got the promotion. Marcus told me this afternoon. It's official. VP of Strategic Development. Can you believe it?" Ethan looked at her, standing there in their kitchen, glowing with pride and ambition and lies. "That's amazing," he said. "Congratulations. Lauren threw her arms around him. We should celebrate. Let's go out, somewhere nice. Absolutely, Ethan said, hugging her back. And as he held her, feeling the warmth of her body and the weight of her betrayal, Ethan made a decision. He would let her have this moment. He would let her believe she'd won, because when the truth finally came out, when everything she'd built came crashing down, he wanted her to remember this feeling. He wanted her to know exactly what she'd lost. 2 days later, Ethan met with a divorce attorney. Her name was Diana Frost, and she had a reputation for being ruthless in family court. She listened as Ethan laid out the evidence: the affair, the pattern, the corporate cover-up, the strategic timing of Lauren's promotion. When he finished, Diana leaned back in her chair and studied him. This isn't just about the divorce, is it? She said. No, Ethan admitted. It's about accountability. Marcus Hale has been doing this for years, and no one stopped him. Lauren made her choices, but he created the system that made those choices possible. I want both of them to face consequences. Diana nodded slowly. Then we're not just filing for divorce. We're going public. Public? Corporate misconduct, abuse of power, breach of fiduciary duty. If Marcus has been protected by the company, that makes Meridian Global liable. We file the divorce, yes, but we also file a whistleblower complaint with the ethics board and leak the story to the press. We make it impossible for them to bury this. Ethan felt something cold and sharp settle in his chest. Do it, he said. Diana smiled. I'll draft the paperwork. In the meantime, do not tip your hand. Act normal. Let her think everything's fine. I've been doing that for weeks, Ethan said quietly. Good, Diana said, because the moment we file, her entire world is going to implode, and I need you to be ready for that. Ethan met her gaze. I'm ready, he said. The next 3 weeks were the strangest of Ethan's life. He went through the motions. He attended Lauren's celebration dinner with her colleagues. He smiled for photos. He toasted her promotion. He listened to her talk about her new responsibilities, her expanded team, her increased salary. And every night, he came home and reviewed the evidence with Diana, refining their strategy, building a case so airtight that no amount of corporate spin could dismantle it. Catherine kept digging. She found more: financial records showing expense account abuse, emails revealing inappropriate relationships with clients, a pattern of behavior that went beyond infidelity and into clear violations of corporate ethics policies. Marcus Hale wasn't just a serial adulterer. He was a liability, and Meridian Global had been protecting him for years. They're going to settle, Diana predicted during one of their meetings. The moment this goes public, they'll try to buy your silence. I'm not interested in money, Ethan said. Then what do you want? Ethan thought about that for a long time. I want him fired, he said finally. I want his reputation destroyed. I want every woman he manipulated to know they weren't crazy, they weren't alone, and they weren't the problem. And I want Lauren to understand that actions have consequences. Diana studied him carefully. That's a lot of rage you're carrying, she said. It's not rage, Ethan said quietly. It's justice. On a Tuesday morning in late September, Ethan served Lauren with divorce papers. He did it at home, before she left for work. She was standing in the kitchen pouring coffee when he walked in and set the folder on the counter. What's this? Lauren asked, still smiling. Divorce papers, Ethan said evenly. You've been served. The smile disappeared. What? I know about Marcus, Ethan said. I know about the affair. I know about the hotel rooms, the trips, the messages. I know all of it, Lauren. Her face went white. Ethan, don't, he said, his voice colder than he'd ever heard it. Don't lie to me, not anymore. Lauren opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. How long have you known? Long enough, Ethan said. Long enough to document everything. Long enough to build a case. Long enough to make sure you can't spin this into something it's not. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Ethan, please, let me explain. There's nothing to explain, Ethan said. You made your choices, now you live with them. He turned to leave. Wait, Lauren said, her voice breaking. What about us? What about our marriage? Ethan stopped at the door and looked back at her. There is no us, he said. There hasn't been for a long time. You just didn't bother to tell me." And then he walked out. Behind him, he heard Lauren collapse into sobs. He didn't look back. The same morning Ethan served Lauren, Diana Frost filed a formal complaint with Meridian Global's ethics board. The complaint detailed Marcus Hale's pattern of inappropriate relationships with subordinates, the company's failure to address previous complaints, and the systemic culture of protection that enabled his behavior. It also included testimony from 3 other women, former employees who Catherine had tracked down, women who had signed NDAs but were willing to speak anonymously to support the complaint. By noon, the story had leaked to the press. By 3 p.m., it was trending on social media. By 5 p.m., Meridian Global stock had dropped 4%, and the company's PR team was in full crisis mode. And by the time Lauren arrived at the office that morning, eyes red, hands shaking, Marcus Hale had already been placed on administrative leave. Ethan didn't watch the fallout. He went to work. He focused on his projects. He ignored the calls from Lauren's family, the messages from mutual friends asking what had happened, the emails from reporters looking for a statement. He let Diana handle the media. He let Catherine handle the investigation. And he let the truth do what it did best, burn through lies. 3 days after the complaint was filed, Meridian Global's CEO issued a public statement announcing a full internal review of workplace conduct policies and the immediate termination of Marcus Hale's employment. Lauren's promotion was quietly rescinded. The whispers started immediately, around the office, in the industry. People talked. People always talked. And Lauren, who had built her entire career on ambition and image, found herself at the center of a scandal she couldn't escape. 1 month after the divorce was filed, Ethan sat in his attorney's office and signed the final settlement agreement. Lauren had tried to fight it. She'd hired her own lawyer, contested the terms, demanded a more favorable division of assets. But the evidence was overwhelming. The affair, the lies, the financial records showing she'd been using their joint accounts to fund trips with Marcus. In the end, she settled. Ethan kept the house. Lauren took her belongings and moved into a small apartment across town. They didn't speak at the final hearing. They sat on opposite sides of the courtroom, signed the documents the judge placed in front of them, and walked out of each other's lives. When it was over, Diana walked Ethan to his car. "How do you feel?" she asked. Ethan thought about that. "Empty," he admitted. "But clean. Like I finally stopped carrying something that was crushing me." Diana nodded. "That's grief," she said gently. "You're mourning the marriage you thought you had. That takes time." "I know," Ethan said. "But for what it's worth," Diana added, "you did the right thing. You held people accountable. You stopped a pattern. That matters." Ethan looked at her. "Did it, though? Marcus is gone, sure. But the system that protected him is still there. The company's still operating. Nothing's really changed." Diana smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised. 3 women have come forward since your case went public. Real complaints. Real investigations. Meridian's board is scrambling to avoid a lawsuit. Change doesn't happen overnight, Ethan. But you started something, and that's more than most people ever do." Ethan nodded slowly. "Thanks," he said. Diana squeezed his shoulder. "Take care of yourself. And if you ever need anything, you know where to find me." She walked away, leaving Ethan standing alone in the parking lot. He got in his car, started the engine, and sat there for a long moment, staring at nothing. Then he drove home. The house felt different now. Not physically. Everything was exactly where it had always been. The couch Lauren had picked out 3 years ago still sat in the same spot. Her books were still on the shelf. Her coffee mug, the one with the chipped handle that she refused to throw away, was still in the cabinet. But the silence had changed. It was no longer comfortable. It was no longer the easy quiet of 2 people who didn't need to fill every moment with words. Now it was the silence of absence, of things left unsaid, of a life that had ended before either of them had officially acknowledged it was over. Ethan walked through the rooms like a stranger in his own home, cataloging everything that would need to be divided, separated, removed. He tried not to think about the memories attached to each object, the lamp they'd bought together on vacation, the painting Lauren had insisted on hanging above the fireplace, the throw pillows she'd rearranged every season. He tried, But the memories came anyway. His phone buzzed, a text from Jamie. "Hey man, you okay? Haven't heard from you in a while. Want to grab a beer?" Ethan stared at the message for a long moment, then set the phone down without responding. He wasn't ready to talk about it yet. Wasn't ready to sit across from his best friend and explain how his marriage had imploded, how the woman he'd trusted had been planning her exit for months, how he'd spent weeks playing detective in his own life. The truth was too raw, too fresh. And Ethan didn't trust himself to talk about it without the anger bleeding through. So he stayed quiet. He stayed alone. And he focused on the one thing that still made sense, making sure the people responsible for this mess faced consequences. The media storm around Meridian Global intensified over the following weeks. What had started as a single ethics complaint had evolved into something much larger. More women came forward, not just from Meridian, but from other companies where Marcus Hale had worked before. A pattern emerged, stretching back over 15 years, of inappropriate relationships, boundary violations, and a corporate culture that rewarded silence and punished transparency. Ethan watched it unfold from a distance, checking news sites during his lunch breaks, scrolling through articles late at night when sleep wouldn't come. He didn't comment. He didn't give interviews. Diana had advised him to stay out of the public eye, and he was content to let her do the talking. But he read everything. He read the op-eds calling for systemic reform in corporate America. He read the think pieces analyzing power dynamics in workplace relationships. He read the comments sections, the ones that praised the women for coming forward, and the ones that blamed them for not speaking up sooner. And he read the statements from Meridian Global's legal team, carefully worded to express concern without admitting liability, promising internal reviews and policy changes while subtly implying that Marcus Hale was a rogue actor, an isolated incident, an unfortunate anomaly in an otherwise ethical organization. It was all bullshit, of course. Ethan knew that. Catherine's investigation had uncovered emails from HR documenting complaints that had been dismissed, NDAs that had been signed, hush money that had been paid. Meridian hadn't just enabled Marcus. They'd actively protected him. But corporate PR teams were good at what they did. They knew how to manage a scandal, how to control the narrative, how to wait out the news cycle until public attention moved on to the next outrage. What they hadn't counted on was Ethan's patience, or his resolve. 3 weeks after the divorce was filed, Ethan received a call from an unfamiliar number he almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Is this Ethan Parker?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes. Who's this?" "My name is Rebecca Navarro. I'm a reporter with the Chicago Tribune. I'm working on a story about Meridian Global and Marcus Hale's termination. I was hoping to ask you a few questions." Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. "I'm not giving interviews." "I understand," Rebecca said quickly, "and I respect that. But I think you should know there's another side to this story that isn't getting told. The company's pushing a narrative that Marcus was the only problem, that his firing fixes everything. But based on what I've uncovered, that's not true. There are structural issues at Meridian that go way beyond one man." Ethan was silent. "I've spoken to 7 former employees," Rebecca continued. "All women. All of them left the company under questionable circumstances. Some signed NDAs, some were pressured into resigning, and all of them say the same thing. HR knew, management knew, and they did nothing." "Then why do you need me?" Ethan asked. "Because you have something they don't," Rebecca said. "You have documentation, you have proof, and you're not bound by an NDA. If you're willing to share what you know, we can make sure this story doesn't get buried." Ethan closed his eyes, thinking. Diana had warned him about this. Talking to the press meant opening himself up to scrutiny, to judgment, to becoming a public figure in a story he'd never asked to be part of. It meant reliving the worst moments of his life in front of strangers. But it also meant the truth would be told, completely, without corporate spin. "I'll think about it," Ethan said finally. "That's all I'm asking," Rebecca said. "Here's my number. Call me if you change your mind." She hung up. Ethan sat there, staring at his phone, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on him. That night he called Diana. "I got a call from a reporter," he said. "Rebecca Navarro, Chicago Tribune. She wants to interview me about Meridian." Diana didn't respond right away. When she did, her voice was carefully neutral. And what did you tell her? That I'd think about it. Good. Because you should. Diana paused. Ethan, I need to be honest with you. Going public could change everything. Right now, you're a private citizen dealing with a private matter. The moment you talk to the press, you become part of the public conversation. People will have opinions about you, about your marriage, about your motives. Are you ready for that? Ethan thought about Lauren, about the life they'd built and the lies she'd told. He thought about Marcus Hale, walking away from Meridian with a severance package and a non-disclosure agreement. He thought about the women who'd been silenced, the complaints that had been buried, the system that had allowed all of it to happen. Yeah, he said. I'm ready. Diana let out a breath. Okay, then let's do this right. I'll reach out to Rebecca, set up some ground rules. You don't talk about the divorce details. You don't speculate about Lauren's relationship with Marcus. You stick to the facts, what you uncovered, what the investigation found, what the company knew and when they knew it. Can you do that? Yes. Good. I'll set it up. They said. The interview took place in a quiet conference room at Diana's law office. Rebecca Navarro was younger than Ethan had expected, mid-30s, sharp-eyed, with a notebook full of questions and a recording device she placed carefully on the table between them. Thank you for agreeing to this, she said as they sat down. I know it's not easy. It's necessary, Ethan said. Rebecca nodded. Let's start at the beginning. When did you first become aware of the relationship between your wife and Marcus Hale? Ethan told her everything. The surprise trip to Chicago, the hotel room, the voice through the door, the weeks of silence while he gathered evidence, the investigation Catherine had conducted, the pattern of behavior that stretched back over a decade. Rebecca took notes, occasionally asking follow-up questions, her expression growing more serious as the story unfolded. And the company? She asked. When did you learn that Meridian knew about Marcus's history? About 2 weeks into the investigation, Ethan said. My investigator found HR records documenting previous complaints. 3 women had reported inappropriate conduct. 2 were offered settlements in exchange for signing NDAs. The 3rd was quietly transferred to a different department. And Marcus faced no consequences? None. He was too valuable. He brought in major clients. The company decided protecting their revenue stream was more important than protecting their employees' own. Rebecca's pen moved across the page. Did your wife know about the other women? Ethan hesitated. I don't think so. I think she believed she was special, that what they had was different. But you don't believe that? No, Ethan said quietly. I think she was just the next one. Rebecca looked up from her notes. That must have been devastating. It was, Ethan admitted. But what made it worse was realizing that none of this had to happen. If Meridian had done the right thing years ago, if they'd fired Marcus the first time someone complained, my wife never would have met him. She never would have gotten involved. Our marriage might have survived. You blame the company. I blame everyone who knew and did nothing, Ethan said. Marcus made his choices. Lauren made hers. But Meridian created the environment that made those choices possible, and that's what needs to change. Rebecca nodded slowly. What do you want to see happen now? Ethan thought about that. I want accountability, real accountability, not just firing one person and pretending the problem's solved. I want Meridian to admit what they did wrong. I want them to change their policies. I want every woman who was silenced to know that it wasn't their fault, that they weren't alone, and that the system that failed them is finally being exposed. And if they don't? Then people need to know what kind of company they're dealing with, Ethan said. Because if it happened to these women, it'll happen to others. And I'm not willing to stay silent while that continues. Rebecca set down her pen. That's a hell of a statement, she said. It's the truth, Ethan replied. The article ran 2 weeks later. It was front-page news, both in print and online. Rebecca had done her homework. She'd interviewed former employees, reviewed court documents, obtained internal emails that showed senior leadership discussing how to handle complaints about Marcus. The story she told was damning, detailed, and impossible to ignore. Meridian Global's stock dropped 12% in a single day. The company's PR team issued a statement expressing disappointment with the article's one-sided narrative and reiterating their commitment to workplace safety. But the damage was done. Advertisers started pulling their accounts, clients began asking questions, and the board of directors called an emergency meeting to discuss potential legal exposure. Ethan read the article 3 times, sitting alone in his living room with a cup of coffee that had gone cold. Rebecca had kept her word. She'd focused on the facts, not the drama. She'd protected his privacy while still telling the story that needed to be told. And she'd made it clear that this wasn't just about one affair or one termination. It was about a systemic failure to protect employees from abuse. His phone rang. Diana. "Have you seen the response?" she asked. "Some of it," Ethan said. "It's massive. Social media is exploding. People are calling for a full investigation. There's even talk of a class action lawsuit from former employees." "Is that good?" Ethan asked. "It's progress," Diana said carefully. "It means people are paying attention. It means Meridian can't just wait this out. But it also means things are about to get messy. You need to be prepared for that." "I am," Ethan said. "Good. Because I have a feeling this is just getting started." Diana was right. Over the next month, the story took on a life of its own. More women came forward, emboldened by the Tribune article. Some had left Meridian years ago. Some were still there, working in fear, afraid to speak up because they'd seen what happened to those who did. A law firm specializing in employment discrimination announced they were filing a class action lawsuit on behalf of 12 former employees. The charges included sexual harassment, retaliation, and creating a hostile work environment. Meridian's CEO resigned. The board hired an outside firm to conduct an independent review of company policies. And the media coverage continued, with think pieces and editorials and cable news segments dissecting every aspect of the scandal. Ethan watched it all from the sidelines, still refusing interview requests, still maintaining his privacy. But he felt something shifting inside him. The anger was still there, yes, but it was no longer consuming him. It was being replaced by something quieter, something steadier. Purpose. He'd started this because he wanted justice for himself, for the betrayal he'd suffered. But somewhere along the way, it had become bigger than that. It had become about making sure no one else had to go through what he'd gone through. No one else had to discover that the institutions they trusted were built on lies. It wasn't revenge anymore. It was responsibility. One evening, 6 weeks after the article ran, Ethan's doorbell rang. He wasn't expecting anyone. He almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of him, and he opened the door to find a woman standing on his porch. She was in her early 30s, professional-looking, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked nervous. "Can I help you?" Ethan asked. "I'm sorry to just show up like this," the woman said. "My name is Angela Torres. I used to work at Meridian. I was one of the women who filed a complaint about Marcus Hale 3 years ago." Ethan's chest tightened. "Okay." "I read the article," Angela continued, "and I needed to tell you thank you for speaking up, for not staying silent. I signed an NDA when I left the company, and I've been terrified to say anything because I thought I'd lose everything. But seeing you come forward, seeing other people finally believe us, it made me realize I don't have to keep carrying this alone." Ethan didn't know what to say. "I know this probably sounds strange," Angela said, her voice trembling slightly. "But you gave me my voice back, and I just wanted you to know that." She turned to leave. "Wait," Ethan said. Angela stopped. "Are you okay?" Ethan asked. "I mean, really, are you okay?" Angela's eyes filled with tears. "I'm getting there," she said. "It's been hard, but I'm getting there." Ethan nodded. "If you ever need anything, someone to talk to, someone who understands, my attorney can put you in touch with resources, people who can help." Angela smiled, wiping her eyes. "Thank you. That means a lot." She walked back to her car, and Ethan stood in the doorway watching her drive away. When she was gone, he closed the door and leaned against it, feeling the weight of her words settling over him. "You gave me my voice back." He'd never thought about it that way. He'd been so focused on the mechanics of the case, on the evidence and the legal strategy and the public accountability, that he hadn't considered what it might mean to the people who'd been silenced. But now he understood. This wasn't just about punishing Marcus or exposing Meridian, it was about creating space for the truth, about showing people that speaking up was possible, that it mattered, that they weren't alone. And for the first time since that night in Chicago, Ethan felt something other than anger or grief. He felt hope. The following week, Ethan received an email from Catherine Riggs. The subject line read, "You should see this." Attached was a news article from a business journal. The headline, "Meridian Global announces major policy overhaul in wake of harassment scandal." Ethan opened the article and read, the company had hired a new chief compliance officer. They were implementing mandatory harassment training for all employees. They were creating an independent ethics hotline. They were revising their NDA policies to ensure that employees could report misconduct without fear of legal retaliation. And they were establishing a victims fund to compensate former employees who had been harmed by the company's failure to act. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough to undo the damage that had been done. But it was something. Ethan forwarded the article to Diana with a single line. "Is this real or is it PR?" Her response came 10 minutes later. Probably both. But it's a start. And it wouldn't have happened without you. Ethan stared at the screen for a long time. Then he closed his laptop and went to bed. The divorce proceedings dragged on longer than Ethan had anticipated. Lauren contested everything: the asset division, the timeline, the characterization of fault. Her attorney argued that the affair was a private matter and shouldn't influence the financial settlement. Ethan's attorney argued that Lauren's deception and financial dishonesty were relevant to the case. The judge listened to both sides, reviewed the evidence, and ultimately sided with Ethan. Lauren was furious. She sent him angry texts accusing him of being vindictive, of trying to destroy her life, of turning something private into a public spectacle. Ethan blocked her number. He didn't need her anger. He didn't need her justifications. He'd heard enough lies to last a lifetime. What he needed was closure. And closure didn't come from engaging with someone who still refused to take responsibility for what they'd done. So he let Diana handle the communications. He focused on his work. He started going to the gym again, not because he cared about fitness, but because he needed somewhere to put the energy that used to go into worrying about his marriage. And slowly, painfully, he started to rebuild. One Saturday morning, 3 months after everything had started, Ethan woke up and realized he'd slept through the night for the first time in weeks. No nightmares. No waking up at 3 a.m. with his mind racing. No lying in the dark wondering what he could have done differently. Just sleep. Deep, dreamless, restorative sleep. He got out of bed, made coffee, and sat on his back porch watching the sun rise over the trees. The house was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet now. Not the silence of loss, but the silence of peace. He thought about Angela Torres, about the way she'd looked at him with gratitude and hope. He thought about the other women who'd come forward, about the policy changes at Meridian, about the conversations happening now that wouldn't have happened if he'd stayed silent. He thought about Lauren, wherever she was, and felt nothing but a distant sadness for the person she'd chosen to become. And he thought about himself, about the man he'd been when this started, and the man he was now. He was different, harder in some ways, more cynical about trust and relationships and the institutions people built their lives around. But he was also clearer, more certain of his values, more willing to stand up when something was wrong, even when it cost him. He'd lost his marriage. He'd lost the life he thought he was building. But he'd found something else, something that felt more solid, more real. He'd found his integrity, and no one could take that away. Ethan's phone buzzed, a text from Jamie. "Hey man, I know you've been going through it, but I'm here whenever you're ready to talk. No pressure. Just want you to know you're not alone." Ethan smiled. He picked up his phone and typed back, "Thanks, Jamie, I appreciate that. How about that beer? Tomorrow night?" The response came almost immediately. "Absolutely. I'll pick the place." Ethan set his phone down and looked out at the morning light spilling across his yard. For the first time in months, the future didn't feel like something to survive. It felt like something to build. The bar Jamie chose was a quiet place on the edge of downtown, the kind of establishment that didn't advertise itself with neon signs or happy hour specials, Just dim lighting, worn leather booths, and a bartender who knew when to refill a glass and when to leave people alone. Ethan arrived first. He ordered a bourbon, neat, and sat in a corner booth where he could see the door. Old habits from his consulting days: always know your exits, always control your sight lines. Jamie walked in 10 minutes later, spotted Ethan immediately, and crossed the room with the easy confidence of someone who'd known him for 20 years. They'd met in college, remained friends through career changes and life transitions, through Ethan's engagement and wedding and all the years that followed. Jamie had been at the ceremony when Ethan married Lauren. He'd given a toast about love and partnership and building a life together. Ethan wondered if Jamie remembered that now. "Hey man," Jamie said, sliding into the booth across from him. "Thanks for finally agreeing to meet up. I was starting to think you'd gone into witness protection or something." Ethan managed a weak smile. Felt like it sometimes. Jamie ordered a beer, and for a few minutes they sat in the comfortable silence of old friends who didn't need to fill every moment with words. But eventually Jamie leaned forward, his expression growing serious. "So," he said carefully, "you want to talk about it, or do you want me to pretend I haven't been reading about your life in the news for the past 2 months? Ethan took a long drink. "You read the articles." "Everyone did, Ethan. It's been all over social media, business journals. Even the morning talk shows picked it up." Jamie paused. "I'm sorry. About all of it. About Lauren. About what you've been through." "Thanks," Ethan said quietly. "I mean it," Jamie continued. "I had no idea. None of us did. Lauren always seemed so, I don't know, solid. Like you two had figured something out that the rest of us were still struggling with." "Yeah, well," Ethan said bitterly, "turns out we hadn't figured out anything. She was just better at hiding it than I was at seeing it." Jamie shook his head. "Don't do that. Don't blame yourself for not catching something she went out of her way to conceal. That's not on you." "Isn't it, though?" Ethan set his glass down harder than he intended. "I was her husband. I lived with her, slept next to her every night. How did I miss it for 6 months?" "Because you trusted her," Jamie said simply. "And trust makes us vulnerable. It makes us blind to things we don't want to see. That's not a flaw, Ethan. That's what being human looks like." Ethan didn't respond. He stared at his drink, watching the amber liquid catch the low light. "How are you doing?" Jamie asked after a moment. "Really?" Ethan considered the question. "I don't know. Some days I'm fine. I wake up, go to work, function like a normal person. Other days I can barely get out of bed. I keep replaying everything, trying to figure out when it started, what I could have done differently, whether any of this was salvageable. And I don't think it was," Ethan admitted. "I don't think she ever planned on staying. I think she was just waiting for the right moment to leave, and I happened to figure it out before she got there." Jamie was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You know what I keep thinking about? That toast I gave at your wedding. All that stuff about partnership and building a future together. I believed every word of it, and I think you did too." "I did?" Ethan said. "So what happened?" "I don't know," Ethan said honestly. "Maybe people change. Maybe she wanted something I couldn't give her. Maybe Marcus offered her a version of herself she liked better. Or maybe she was always capable of this, and I just never saw it." Jamie took a drink, processing that. "Have you talked to her since the divorce filing?" "No, my attorney handles everything. Lauren's tried to reach out a few times, texts, emails, but I don't respond. There's nothing left to say." "You don't want closure?" "Closure's a myth," Ethan said. "It's something people tell themselves to feel better about things that can't be fixed. Lauren made her choices. I made mine. We don't need to have some tearful conversation where she explains herself and I forgive her. That's not how this works." Jamie studied him carefully. "You sound angry." "I am angry," Ethan said. "I'm furious. But I'm also done letting that anger control me. I did what I needed to do. I exposed what happened. I held people accountable, and now I'm moving forward. That's the only closure I need." "And Marcus? What happened to him?" "Fired. Blacklisted in the industry. His reputation's destroyed. He'll probably land somewhere eventually, guys like him always do. But it won't be easy. And it won't be at a company like Meridian." "Good," Jamie said simply. "He deserves worse." Ethan nodded. "He does. But I'll take what I can get." They sat in silence for a while longer, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them. Then Jamie signaled for another round and said, "So what now? What's next for you?" Ethan thought about that. "Honestly, I have no idea. I've spent the last 3 months focused on the divorce, on the case, on making sure the truth got out. I haven't thought much beyond that." "Maybe that's not a bad thing," Jamie said. "Maybe you need some time to just exist without a plan. Figure out who you are when you're not fighting something." "Maybe," Ethan said. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. He wasn't good at existing without purpose. He needed something to work toward, something to build. He just didn't know what that was yet. The weeks that followed were strange and disorienting. The media attention began to fade as new scandals replaced old ones in the public consciousness. Meridian Global's stock stabilized. The class action lawsuit moved forward, but slowly, grinding through the legal system with the kind of bureaucratic patience that Ethan found both frustrating and oddly comforting. At least something was still happening. At least the fight wasn't over. But Ethan's role in it had diminished. He wasn't needed for depositions anymore. Diana handled most of the legal communications. Catherine had moved on to other cases. And Ethan found himself with something he hadn't had in months: time. He didn't know what to do with it. He threw himself into work, taking on extra projects, staying late at the office, volunteering for assignments that required travel. Anything to avoid going home to the empty house, to the rooms that still smelled faintly of Lauren's perfume, to the silence that reminded him of everything he'd lost. His colleagues noticed. His boss pulled him aside one afternoon and asked if everything was okay. "I'm fine," Ethan said. "Just trying to stay busy." "You're doing more than staying busy," his boss said. "You're burning yourself out. Take some time off. Go somewhere. Clear your head." "I don't need time off." "Ethan," his boss said gently, "you just went through a divorce. You were in the news. You exposed a major corporate scandal. You're allowed to not be fine right now." Ethan wanted to argue, but he didn't have the energy. "I'll think about it," he said. His boss nodded. "Good. And Ethan, whatever you're dealing with, you don't have to deal with it alone. We have resources, counselors, support systems. Use them." Ethan left the office that day feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time: vulnerable. He didn't like it. That night, Ethan found himself scrolling through old photos on his phone. He didn't mean to. He'd been trying to delete some files to free up storage space, and the Photos app had opened automatically, displaying memories from years past. Vacations with Lauren, holidays with her family, ordinary moments, dinner at their favorite restaurant, hiking in the mountains, lazy Sunday mornings with coffee and newspapers. They looked happy in those photos. Genuinely happy. Ethan stared at one image in particular, a selfie they'd taken on their second anniversary. They were standing on a beach somewhere in California, the ocean behind them, Lauren's head resting on his shoulder, both of them smiling like they'd discovered something the rest of the world didn't know about yet. He remembered that day, remembered how perfect it had felt, how certain he'd been that they'd figured it out, that they were building something real and lasting. Had it all been a lie? Or had something changed between then and now? Had there been a moment when Lauren stopped loving him, stopped wanting this life, stopped seeing a future with him? Or had she always been capable of this, and he'd just been too naive to see it? Ethan deleted the photo, then he deleted the next one, and the next. He went through his entire photo library, methodically removing every image of Lauren, every reminder of the life they'd shared. It took him 2 hours, and when he was finished, his phone felt lighter, emptier, like his life. He set the phone down and stared at the ceiling, wondering if this was what healing looked like. Erasing the past, removing evidence that it had ever existed, pretending that 5 years of marriage could be undone with a few swipes of his thumb. It didn't feel like healing, it felt like erasure. Thoughts. The next morning, Ethan received an unexpected email. The sender was someone named Dr. Lydia Chen, a professor of organizational psychology at Northwestern University. The subject line read, "Research opportunity, would love to discuss." Ethan almost deleted it. He'd been getting random emails ever since the story broke. Reporters looking for follow-ups, lawyers fishing for clients, strangers offering unsolicited advice or sharing their own stories of betrayal. He'd learned to ignore most of them. But something about this one made him pause. He opened it. Dear Mr. Parker, my name is Dr. Lydia Chen, and I teach organizational psychology at Northwestern. I've been following your case with great interest, not from a sensationalist perspective, but from an academic one. I'm currently researching workplace power dynamics and the systemic factors that enable misconduct in corporate environments. Your willingness to speak publicly about what happened at Meridian Global has been invaluable in helping people understand how these systems operate. I'm writing to ask if you'd be willing to participate in a research study I'm conducting on organizational accountability and whistleblower experiences. I understand if you're not interested. You've already given more than most people would. But if you're open to it, I'd love to discuss the possibility of collaborating on something that could help prevent situations like yours from happening to others. Best regards, Dr. Lydia Chen. Ethan read the email twice. Then he replied, I'm interested. Let's talk. They met at a coffee shop near the university 2 days later. Dr. Chen was in her late 40s, with graying hair pulled into a loose bun and the kind of intense, focused energy that Ethan associated with people who genuinely cared about their work. She thanked him for coming, ordered them both coffee, and got straight to the point. I've been studying workplace misconduct for 15 years, she said, pulling out a tablet. Sexual harassment, discrimination, retaliation, all of it. And what I've found is that the problem isn't just individual bad actors. It's the systems that protect them. The policies that prioritize liability management over employee safety. The cultures that reward silence and punish transparency. That sounds familiar, Ethan said dryly. Dr. Chen smiled faintly. I imagine it does. What happened at Meridian isn't unique. It's a pattern I've seen across dozens of companies in multiple industries. But what is unique is your response. Most people in your situation either stay silent out of fear, or they burn out trying to fight a system that's designed to outlast them. You did neither. You methodically built a case, exposed the truth, and forced accountability. That's rare. I didn't have a choice, Ethan said. You did, Dr. Chen corrected gently. You could have walked away, filed for divorce quietly, taken a settlement if one was offered, moved on with your life. Most people would have, but you didn't. Why? Ethan thought about that. Because staying silent felt like letting them win, like saying what they did was acceptable. And I couldn't live with that. Dr. Chen nodded, making notes. That sense of moral obligation, that's something I see in a lot of whistleblowers. It's not about revenge or personal gain, it's about principle, about refusing to be complicit in a system you know is wrong. Is that what I am? Ethan asked. A whistleblower? In the truest sense, yes. You exposed wrongdoing that was being concealed by an institution. That's the definition. Ethan had never thought of himself that way. He'd just been trying to hold people accountable for what they'd done to him. But hearing Dr. Chen describe it in those terms made it feel bigger, more significant. So what do you want from me? He asked. Your story, Dr. Chen said. Not for publication, not for public consumption, just for research. I'm trying to understand what makes some people willing to fight when others give up. What systems worked in your favor, and which ones worked against you? What could have been different if Meridian had handled the initial complaints properly? Your insights could help shape better policies, better training, better accountability mechanisms. Ethan considered that. And this would help other people? People in situations like mine? I believe so, Dr. Chen said. We can't stop every bad actor, but we can make it harder for institutions to protect them. We can create environments where speaking up is less risky, where accountability is built into the culture instead of being an afterthought. Your experience could be part of that change. Ethan felt something shift in his chest. For months, he'd been focused on the personal, the betrayal, the divorce, the anger. But this was different. This was about turning his pain into something useful, something that mattered beyond his own life. Okay, he said. I'm in. Dr. Chen smiled. Thank you. I think this could be really valuable. They spent the next 2 hours talking about Meridian, about Marcus, about the investigation and the legal process and the media coverage. Dr. Chen asked thoughtful questions, never pushing, always giving Ethan space to process his answers. And for the first time since everything had fallen apart, Ethan felt like someone was actually listening. Not to get a story, not to assign blame, but to understand, to learn, to make things better. When they finally wrapped up, Dr. Chen walked him to the door. "One more question," she said. "If you could go back and change one thing, knowing everything you know now, what would it be?" Ethan thought about that for a long time. "I'd pay more attention," he said finally, "to the warning signs I missed, to the ways Lauren was changing, to my own instincts when something felt off. I trusted too easily. I assumed good intentions, and that almost destroyed me." Dr. Chen nodded. "That's a hard lesson." "Yeah," Ethan said, "but it's one I won't forget." Quote, over the following weeks, Ethan met with Dr. Chen several more times. Each session was different. Sometimes they talked about specific incidents, sometimes about broader patterns, sometimes about the emotional toll of going public with something so personal. Dr. Chen was skilled at drawing out details Ethan hadn't consciously registered, at helping him see connections he'd missed. And slowly, through those conversations, Ethan began to process what had happened in a way he hadn't been able to before. He'd been so focused on the mechanics of the case, the evidence, the legal strategy, the public accountability, that he hadn't given himself permission to grieve, to feel the full weight of what he'd lost. But talking to Dr. Chen, revisiting those moments, allowed him to finally sit with the pain instead of running from it. He grieved the marriage that had ended, the future he'd imagined, the trust that had been broken, the version of himself that had believed love was enough. And in grieving, he started to heal. Not quickly, not completely, but enough to start imagining a future that didn't revolve around anger or revenge or holding people accountable, a future where he could just be himself again. One afternoon, after a particularly intense session with Dr. Chen, Ethan drove home and found himself pulling into the parking lot of a small bookstore he used to visit with Lauren. He hadn't been there in over a year. They used to go on Saturday mornings, browsing the shelves, recommending books to each other, grabbing coffee at the cafe in the back. Ethan almost turned around, almost drove away, but something made him get out of the car and walk inside. The store hadn't changed. The same creaky wooden floors, the same smell of old paper and fresh coffee, the same cluttered shelves overflowing with used books. Ethan wandered through the aisles, not looking for anything in particular, just letting the familiar space wash over him. He found himself in the psychology section, scanning titles. And there, on the third shelf, was a book Dr. Chen had mentioned during one of their conversations, a study on moral courage and the psychology of whistleblowers. Ethan pulled it off the shelf and flipped through the pages. The introduction talked about ordinary people who'd made extraordinary choices, who'd risked everything to expose wrongdoing, who'd chosen principle over comfort. People like him. Ethan bought the book, and as he walked back to his car, he realized something that made him stop in the middle of the parking lot. He wasn't angry anymore. The rage that had fueled him for months, that had driven him to investigate and expose and demand accountability, it was gone. Not replaced by forgiveness or acceptance, but by something quieter, something steadier, understanding. He understood now what Lauren had done and why. He understood the system that had enabled Marcus and the culture that had protected him. He understood the cost of speaking up and the value of doing it anyway. And he understood that he couldn't change the past. He could only decide what to do with the future. Ethan got in his car and drove home. For the first time in months, the house didn't feel empty when he walked through the door. It felt like his. That night, Ethan received a text from an unknown number. "Mr. Parker, this is Angela Torres. We met a few weeks ago at your house. I hope it's okay that I'm reaching out. I wanted to let you know that I spoke to a lawyer today. I'm joining the class action suit against Meridian. I never thought I'd have the courage to do that, but your example showed me it was possible. Thank you for that. I hope you're doing well." Ethan stared at the message for a long time. Then he typed back, "Thank you for telling me. I'm proud of you for taking that step. You're stronger than you know." Angela's response came almost immediately. "So are you." Ethan set his phone down and looked around his living room, at the couch, the bookshelves, the empty spaces where Lauren's things used to be. He'd lost so much. his marriage, his trust, his sense of security. But he'd gained something too, something he hadn't expected. He'd found his voice, his courage, his ability to stand up when it mattered. And that was worth something. That was worth everything. The following week, Diana called with news. Meridian's lawyers want to settle, she said. They're offering a compensation package for the divorce. More than we asked for, actually. They want this to go away quietly. Of course they do, Ethan said. Do you want to consider it? Ethan thought about that. What's the catch? The usual, you sign an NDA. You agree not to speak publicly about the case or the company. You walk away clean but silent. And if I don't take it? Then we keep fighting. The divorce proceeds as planned. We push for a trial in the class action suit, and you maintain your right to speak publicly. But it'll take longer. It'll be messier. And there's no guarantee the outcome will be better. Ethan closed his eyes. I need to think about it. Take your time, Diana said. But Ethan, whatever you decide, make sure it's for the right reasons. Don't keep fighting just because you're angry. Fight because it matters. After she hung up, Ethan sat with the decision for a long time. Part of him wanted to reject the settlement on principle, to refuse to be bought, to keep the fight going until every truth was exposed, until every person responsible faced consequences. But another part of him, the part that had been talking to Dr. Chen, the part that had started to heal, wondered if prolonging the fight was worth the cost. He'd already accomplished what he set out to do. Marcus was gone. The company was changing its policies. Other women were finding their voices. Maybe that was enough. Maybe he didn't need to sacrifice the rest of his life to keep proving a point. Ethan picked up his phone and called Diana back. I'll take the settlement, he said. But I want one condition. What's that? I'm not signing an NDA. They can keep their money if it comes with silence. I'll take a fair financial settlement, but I reserve the right to tell my story if I choose to. Diana was quiet for a moment. Gartit. That's going to be a hard sell. Then let them walk away, Ethan said. I'm done being controlled by fear of what might happen if I speak up. If they want this over, they'll agree to my terms. Diana laughed softly. You know what? I think they might. Let me see what I can do. 2 days later, Diana called back. They agreed, she said, sounding almost surprised. No NDA, fair financial settlement. You're free to speak or stay silent as you choose. Ethan exhaled slowly. Okay, let's do it. And just like that, it was over. The finality of it hit Ethan harder than he expected. He'd spent months fighting, building evidence, strategizing with attorneys, exposing corruption, demanding accountability. The battle had given him purpose, structure, a reason to wake up every morning with something to accomplish. And now, with the settlement signed and the divorce decree finalized, that purpose was gone. He should have felt relief. Victory, even. Instead, he felt hollow. Ethan sat in Diana's office, staring at the document spread across her desk. His signature was there, neat and precise, next to Lauren's. 2 names that had once been joined in marriage, now separated by legal language and irreconcilable differences. How do you feel? Diana asked, watching him carefully. Ethan didn't answer right away. He was trying to identify the emotion churning in his chest, but it kept shifting. Grief bleeding into anger, anger dissolving into exhaustion, exhaustion circling back to something that felt uncomfortably close to emptiness. I don't know, he said finally. I thought I'd feel different, like I'd turned a corner or closed a chapter or whatever metaphor people use when something ends. But mostly, I just feel tired. Diana nodded. That's normal. You've been running on adrenaline for months. Now that the immediate crisis is over, your body and mind are trying to process everything you've been through. Give yourself time. How much time? Ethan asked, trying to keep the frustration out of his voice. As much as you need, Diana said gently. There's no timeline for healing from something like this. You lost a marriage, yes, but you also lost trust, safety, the belief that the world operates fairly. Those aren't things you get over in a few weeks. Ethan gathered the documents and slid them into his briefcase. What happens now? With the class action suit? That moves forward independently. Your settlement doesn't affect the other plaintiffs. The trial's scheduled for next spring. If you're called to testify, we'll prep you. Otherwise, your part in this is done. Done, Ethan repeated. The word felt strange in his mouth. Diana stood and extended her hand. You did good work here, Ethan. You should be proud of that. Ethan shook her hand, thanked her for everything, and walked out of her office for what he hoped would be the last time. Outside, the afternoon sun was bright and sharp, making him squint. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, briefcase in hand, watching people hurry past, strangers living their own complicated lives, carrying their own invisible burdens. None of them knew who he was. None of them knew what he'd been through. And for the first time in months, that anonymity felt like a gift. Ethan drove home slowly, taking surface streets instead of the highway, in no particular rush to arrive anywhere. His phone buzzed. A text from Jamie. Heard the divorce is finalized. You okay? Ethan pulled over and typed back. Yeah, it's over. Jamie's response came immediately. Want company tonight? I can bring pizza and terrible action movies. Ethan smiled despite himself. That actually sounds perfect. Be there at 7. Ethan set his phone down and sat there in his parked car, feeling something warm and unexpected unfold in his chest. Not happiness, exactly, but connection. The knowledge that he wasn't as alone as he sometimes felt. He put the car back in gear and continued home. Jamie showed up at 6:45 with 2 large pizzas, a 6-pack of beer, and a collection of movies that looked like they'd been pulled from a bargain bin at a gas station. I wasn't kidding about the terrible part, Jamie said, holding up a DVD case featuring an explosion and at least 3 shirtless men holding improbably large weapons. This one has a 2-star rating and a plot summary that makes absolutely no sense. It's perfect. Ethan laughed. Actually laughed, for the first time in what felt like weeks. You're a good friend, you know that? I do, Jamie said, heading to the kitchen. Which is why I'm not going to ask you how you're feeling or make you talk about your emotions unless you want to. Tonight we're eating pizza, drinking beer, and watching objectively terrible cinema. That's the plan. They settled onto the couch, and Jamie queued up the first movie. Something involving a rogue submarine, a conspiracy that went all the way to the president, and dialogue that sounded like it had been written by someone who'd never actually met a human being. It was gloriously, magnificently awful. And for 2 hours, Ethan didn't think about Lauren or Marcus or Meridian Global or any of the things that had consumed his life for the past 4 months. He just sat with his best friend, ate pizza, and laughed at the absurdity unfolding on screen. When the movie ended, Jamie grabbed another beer and said, Okay, I lied. I do need to ask you something. Here it comes, Ethan said. What are you going to do now? Jamie asked. And before you say, I don't know, I want you to actually think about it. You've spent months fighting this battle. Now that it's over, what do you want? Not what you think you should want. What do you actually want? Ethan was quiet for a long time, turning the question over in his mind. I want to feel like myself again, he said finally. I want to wake up without this weight on my chest. I want to trust people without constantly looking for hidden motives. I want my life to be about more than just surviving what happened to me. That's a start, Jamie said, but that's all reactive stuff, things you want to stop feeling. What do you want to start feeling? What do you want to build? Ethan had no answer to that. He'd been so focused on dismantling the wreckage of his old life that he hadn't thought about what might come next. I don't know, he admitted. Jamie nodded. Fair enough, but maybe that's your project now. Not fighting someone else's corruption or fixing someone else's mistakes. Just figuring out what Ethan Parker wants when nobody's telling him who to be. The words settled over Ethan like a challenge. Not aggressive, but pointed. True. You sound like a fortune cookie, Ethan said. A wise fortune cookie, Jamie corrected. There's a difference. They watched another movie, this one involving time travel and ninjas, which somehow made even less sense than the submarine one. And by the time Jamie left around midnight, Ethan felt lighter than he had in weeks. Not fixed, not healed, but lighter. It was something. Pashin. The next morning, Ethan woke to an email from Dr. Chen. Ethan, I wanted to let you know that the preliminary findings from our research study are showing some really promising patterns. Your insights have been invaluable, and I think we're developing a framework that could genuinely help organizations prevent the kind of misconduct you experienced. I'm presenting at a conference next month. Would you be interested in attending? No pressure, but I thought you might find it meaningful to see how your story is contributing to systemic change. Let me know. Ethan read the email twice. Then he replied, I'd like that. Send me the details. He spent the rest of the morning researching Dr. Chen's work more thoroughly. She'd published extensively on organizational behavior, workplace ethics, and the psychology of institutional accountability. Her studies had influenced policy changes at several major corporations. She wasn't just an academic observer. She was actively working to change the systems that enabled abuse. And Ethan's story was part of that work. The realization sparked something in him. Not pride exactly, but purpose. The sense that what he'd been through wasn't just personal trauma, it was data, evidence, a case study that could help protect others. He thought about Angela Torres, about the text she'd sent thanking him for giving her courage. He thought about the other women who'd come forward, the policy changes at Meridian, the conversations happening now in boardrooms and HR departments across the country. All of it had started because he'd refused to stay silent. And suddenly, Ethan understood what Jamie had been asking him the night before. What did he want to build? He wanted to build on this. He wanted to take the worst experience of his life and turn it into something that mattered, not through revenge or anger, but through education, advocacy, helping others navigate situations like his with better tools and clearer pathways to accountability. He didn't know exactly what that looked like yet, but for the first time since everything had fallen apart, he had a direction. 2 weeks later, Ethan attended Dr. Chen's conference presentation. It was held at a downtown hotel, in a ballroom filled with academics, HR professionals, corporate executives, and nonprofit leaders. Ethan sat in the back row, feeling simultaneously invisible and exposed. Nobody knew who he was, but his story was about to be dissected in front of 200 strangers. Dr. Chen took the stage and began her presentation with a simple question. What makes someone willing to fight when fighting could cost them everything? She walked through her research methodology, the patterns she'd identified across dozens of cases, the common factors that distinguish people who reported misconduct from those who stayed silent. And then she presented Ethan's case, not using his name, but telling his story in enough detail that he recognized every beat. The hotel room in Chicago, the months of investigation, the decision to go public, the cost of speaking up, and the impact it had created. Dr. Chen concluded with this. What we see in cases like this is that whistleblowers aren't motivated primarily by personal gain or revenge. They're motivated by a sense of moral obligation, the belief that staying silent makes them complicit in systems they know are wrong. This case demonstrates that when individuals are willing to absorb personal cost in service of accountability, they create openings for systemic change, but they shouldn't have to do it alone. Organizations need to build structures that protect truth-tellers instead of punishing them. The audience applauded. Questions followed about legal protections for whistleblowers, about how to create genuinely safe reporting mechanisms, about the psychological toll of fighting institutional power. Ethan listened to all of it, feeling a strange mix of pride and discomfort. His pain had become a talking point. His trauma had become a case study, but it was helping people understand, and that mattered. After the presentation, Dr. Chen found him in the lobby. "You came," she said, smiling. "I wasn't sure you would." "I needed to see it," Ethan said. "Needed to understand how my story fits into the bigger picture." And it helps, Ethan admitted. Knowing that what I went through wasn't just personal, that it's part of a pattern you're helping people recognize and interrupt. That makes it feel less isolating. Dr. Chen nodded. "I'm glad. And Ethan, I meant what I said up there. What you did took courage. Not everyone has that." "I didn't feel courageous," Ethan said. "I felt angry and betrayed and desperate for some kind of justice." "Those feelings don't disqualify the courage," Dr. Chen said gently. "They're what made it necessary." Before Ethan could respond, a woman approached them, late 30s, professional demeanor, carrying a leather portfolio. "Excuse me," she said, looking at Dr. Chen. "That was a powerful presentation. I'm Sarah Vance, Director of Compliance at Hartwell Industries. We've been struggling with how to create meaningful accountability structures, and your research is exactly what we need. I'd love to discuss bringing you in for a consulting engagement. Dr. Chen handed her a business card. I'd be happy to talk. Send me an email, and we'll set something up. After Sarah walked away, Dr. Chen turned back to Ethan. See? This is what I mean. Your story is creating change. Maybe not as dramatically as you wanted, maybe not as fast, but it's happening. Ethan felt something shift in his chest, the tight knot of anger and grief loosening just slightly. Thank you, he said, for making this mean something. You made it mean something, Dr. Chen corrected. I'm just helping it reach the right people. Over the next several weeks, Ethan found himself increasingly involved in Dr. Chen's work. She invited him to participate in panel discussions about workplace ethics. She asked him to review drafts of papers before publication, offering feedback from the perspective of someone who'd actually lived through what she was studying. She introduced him to advocacy organizations working on whistleblower protections, policy reform, corporate accountability. And slowly, almost without realizing it, Ethan began building a new identity, not as the betrayed husband or the wronged employee, but as someone who understood these systems and could help others navigate them. He started getting emails from strangers who'd read about his case, people facing similar situations, asking for advice, looking for guidance. At first, he didn't know how to respond. What wisdom could he possibly offer? He'd just been trying to survive. But then he started replying, carefully, thoughtfully, sharing what he'd learned about documentation, legal strategies, emotional resilience. He couldn't fix their situations, but he could offer something valuable, perspective from someone who'd been there. One email came from a young woman named Michelle who worked at a tech startup. Mr. Parker, I've been following your story since it broke. I'm in a similar situation. My supervisor has been making inappropriate advances, and when I reported it to HR, they told me I was misinterpreting his intentions. I feel crazy, like I'm making something out of nothing. But then I read about what you went through, and I realized I'm not crazy. The system is just designed to make me feel that way. I don't know what to do, but I wanted to thank you for showing me that speaking up is possible. Ethan read that email 3 times. Then he wrote back, Michelle, you're not crazy. Trust your instincts. Document everything. Dates, times, witnesses, what was said. Keep copies somewhere they can't be deleted or destroyed. Find an attorney who specializes in employment law before you escalate further. And most importantly, know that you're not alone. What you're experiencing is a pattern, not a personal failing. If you need resources or referrals, let me know. I'm happy to help. Michelle's response came the next day. Thank you. I was so scared to even write that first email, but knowing someone understands makes me feel less alone. I'm going to start documenting like you said, and I'm going to find a lawyer. This stops now. Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in months. Not satisfaction exactly, but something close. The sense that his experience, as painful as it had been, was serving a purpose beyond his own healing. What? One evening, Ethan received a phone call from Catherine Riggs, the investigator who'd helped him build his case. Hey, Ethan, got a minute? Sure. What's up? I'm working on a new case, Catherine said. Corporate misconduct at a financial services company. Similar pattern to what you dealt with. Senior executive, pattern of inappropriate relationships, company protecting him. The client wants to proceed carefully, and I thought of you. Would you be willing to talk to her? Share your experience? Maybe help her understand what she's up against? Ethan hesitated. He'd been trying to move forward, not backward. Helping someone else fight the same battle he'd fought felt like reopening wounds that were just starting to heal. But then he thought about Michelle, about Angela Torres, about all the people who'd reached out, looking for hope in the middle of their own nightmares. Yeah, he said. I'll talk to her. Catherine set up a meeting for the following week. The client's name was Rachel Simmons. She was 32, a financial analyst who'd been with her company for 6 years. She came to the meeting looking exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, shoulders hunched like she was carrying a weight she couldn't quite set down. Ethan recognized that posture. He'd worn it himself. Thank you for meeting with me, Rachel said as they sat down in Catherine's office. I know this is probably the last thing you want to talk about. It's fine, Ethan said. I'm here because I know what you're going through, and I know how alone it can feel. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. It does. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Like maybe I brought this on myself somehow. Like if I just dressed differently or acted differently or… Stop, Ethan said gently. That's not how this works. None of this is your fault. The person abusing their power is responsible. The company protecting them is responsible. You're just trying to survive in a system that's rigged against you. But everyone at work thinks I'm making it up, Rachel said, her voice breaking. Or that I'm being dramatic. HR keeps telling me he's just friendly, that I'm misreading social cues. They make me feel like the problem. That's what they do, Ethan said. They make you question yourself because it's easier than questioning the system. It's cheaper than admitting they've failed to protect you. But you're not wrong, Rachel. If something feels wrong, it is wrong. Trust that. They talked for over an hour. Ethan shared his timeline, when he'd started documenting, when he'd hired Catherine, when he decided to go public. He was honest about the cost, about the emotional toll, about the nights when he doubted whether any of it was worth it. But he was also honest about the outcome, the accountability, the policy changes, the women who'd found courage because someone had finally spoken up. I'm not saying it'll be easy, Ethan said. It won't. This kind of fight takes everything you have, but you're stronger than you think, and you don't have to do it alone. Rachel wiped her eyes. What if I lose my job? What if nobody believes me? Then you'll rebuild, Ethan said simply. I lost my marriage. I lost the life I thought I was building, and I'm still here, still standing. You will be too. After Rachel left, Catherine walked Ethan to the elevator. That was good, she said. What you told her, she needed to hear it. I just told her the truth, Ethan said. Sometimes that's exactly what people need, Catherine said. You're good at this, helping people understand they're not alone. You should think about doing more of it. More of it how? I don't know. Consulting, advocacy work, speaking engagements. There's a whole ecosystem of people working on these issues. Nonprofits, legal organizations, corporate ethics groups. You have expertise they need. Ethan hadn't thought about it in those terms before. He'd just been responding to requests as they came in, trying to help where he could. But Catherine was right. There was a need for what he knew, for someone who'd been through the system and come out the other side. I'll think about it, he said. Catherine smiled. Good, because the world needs more people willing to do what you did. That night, Ethan sat at his kitchen table with a notebook and a pen. He wrote down names, Michelle, Angela, Rachel, the other people who'd reached out. He wrote down organizations Dr. Chen had mentioned, advocacy groups Catherine had referenced, policy initiatives he'd read about, and then he wrote a question. What do I want to build? Jamie had asked him that weeks ago, and Ethan hadn't had an answer. But sitting there now, looking at the patterns emerging on the page, he realized he did have an answer. He wanted to build a bridge between people who were suffering in silence and people who had the power to help them, between lived experience and systemic change, between personal pain and collective accountability. He didn't know exactly what that looked like yet. A nonprofit? A consulting practice? Some kind of advocacy organization? But he knew it mattered, and he knew he was the right person to do it. For the first time since that night in Chicago, Ethan felt something beyond survival. He felt purpose. The idea crystallized over the following weeks, taking shape in conversations with Dr. Chen, in late-night planning sessions with Jamie, in quiet moments when Ethan let himself imagine what his life could become instead of what it had been. He started small. He registered a consulting practice, Parker Accountability Solutions, and built a simple website outlining his services. Workplace misconduct consulting, whistleblower support, organizational ethics review. The language felt clinical, almost sterile, but it was a start. Within days, he received his first inquiry. The email came from a woman named Jennifer Park, an HR director at a mid-sized manufacturing company in Ohio. Her message was brief but pointed. We have a situation developing with one of our senior managers. Multiple complaints, pattern of behavior, legal exposure. We need someone who understands how these situations escalate and how to prevent them from destroying the organization. Your background suggests you might be that person. Are you available for a consultation? Ethan read the email 3 times before responding. This was different from helping individuals like Michelle or Rachel. This was working with the institution itself, the kind of organization that had failed him, that had protected Marcus, that had prioritized liability over accountability. Part of him wanted to refuse, wanted to stay on the side of the victims, not the organizations. But another part of him, the part that had been talking to Dr. Chen, that understood systemic change required working within systems, knew this was exactly what he needed to do. He couldn't fix every broken institution, but he could help the ones willing to change. He replied, "Yes, let's talk." The consultation took place over video conference 2 days later. Jennifer Park appeared on screen alongside the company's CEO, a man named Richard Brennan, who looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. The general counsel was also present, a sharp-eyed woman named Diane Moss, who took notes throughout the conversation. "Thank you for making time for this," Richard said, his voice tight with stress. "We're in a difficult position, and frankly, we don't know how to handle it without making things worse." "Tell me what's happening," Ethan said. Jennifer pulled up a document on screen. "We've received 4 complaints in the past 6 weeks about our VP of Operations, Tom Hendricks. The complaints range from inappropriate comments to boundary violations to what one employee described as coercive pressure to socialize outside of work. We conducted a preliminary investigation, but Tom is claiming the complaints are retaliation for performance reviews he gave earlier this year." "And what does your investigation show?" Ethan asked. Diane spoke up. "The complaints are credible. Multiple witnesses, documented incidents, but Tom has been with the company for 15 years. He's well liked by the board. And if we terminate him without ironclad evidence, he's threatened to sue for wrongful termination." "So you're paralyzed," Ethan said. Richard nodded. "Exactly. We want to do the right thing, but we're terrified of the legal exposure. If we fire him and he sues, we could be looking at millions in damages. If we don't fire him and the situation escalates, we could be looking at a harassment lawsuit from the employees. We can't win." Ethan leaned back in his chair, considering. This was the exact kind of institutional paralysis that had allowed Marcus to operate unchecked for years. The fear of litigation overriding the moral imperative to protect employees. "You're asking the wrong question," Ethan said finally. "You're focused on how to minimize legal risk. But the question you should be asking is, how do we create an environment where this kind of behavior doesn't happen in the first place?" "We have policies," Diane said defensively. "Harassment training, reporting mechanisms. We're not negligent." "Having policies isn't the same as enforcing them," Ethan said. "And enforcement requires more than just reacting to complaints. It requires building a culture where people know that speaking up will be taken seriously, where power imbalances are acknowledged and addressed, where senior employees don't get special treatment because they're valuable to the bottom line." Richard rubbed his face. "So what do we do? Right now? With Tom Hendricks?" "You investigate thoroughly," Ethan said. "Not a preliminary review, a comprehensive, independent investigation conducted by someone outside the organization who has no stake in the outcome. You document everything. You interview everyone involved. And then you make a decision based on the evidence, not on how long Tom's been here or how much revenue he generates." "And if the evidence supports termination?" Jennifer asked. "Then you terminate him," Ethan said simply, clearly, professionally, with documentation that explains exactly why. You don't make it personal. You don't humiliate him. But you don't protect him either. You show your other employees that accountability applies to everyone, regardless of tenure or position." "He'll sue," Diane said. "Maybe," Ethan agreed, "but if you've documented everything properly, if you've followed your own policies, if you've given him due process, you'll survive the lawsuit. What you won't survive is letting this continue and having it explode into a public scandal. Ask Meridian Global how that worked out for them." The room went quiet. Richard exchanged glances with Jennifer and Diane. Then he said, "Can you help us? Guide us through this process? We need someone who's seen how these situations play out and can help us avoid the pitfalls." Ethan thought about it. This wasn't just consulting. This was actively shaping how an organization handled misconduct. This was his chance to prove that companies could do better if they chose to. "I can," he said, "but I need your commitment that you're willing to make hard decisions, that you won't prioritize Tom's comfort over your employees' safety, that you'll follow the evidence wherever it leads." "You have it," Richard said without hesitation. "Then let's get to work," Ethan said. Over the next month, Ethan worked closely with Jennifer's team to oversee the investigation into Tom Hendricks. He helped them select an independent investigator, someone with no prior relationship to the company, no conflicts of interest, no incentive to bury uncomfortable findings. He reviewed interview protocols to ensure they were fair but thorough. He advised on how to communicate with employees about what was happening without compromising the investigation's integrity. And when the investigation concluded, the findings were damning. Tom Hendricks had engaged in a pattern of inappropriate behavior spanning 3 years. Multiple employees had experienced it. Some had reported it informally to supervisors who'd done nothing. Others had stayed silent out of fear of retaliation. The evidence was overwhelming. Richard called an emergency board meeting. Ethan sat in via video conference, presenting the findings and his recommendations. Based on the investigation, Ethan said, Tom Hendricks violated company policy repeatedly and created a hostile work environment. The evidence supports immediate termination. But termination alone isn't enough. You need to address the systemic failures that allowed this to continue unchecked for 3 years. One board member, an older man named Frank who'd worked with Tom for years, pushed back. "Tom's made mistakes, sure, but don't you think we're being hasty? Maybe a suspension, some counseling, a formal warning?" Ethan met his gaze through the screen. "Would you say the same thing if Tom had embezzled from the company? If he'd falsified financial records? If he'd violated safety regulations that put workers at risk?" "That's not the same thing," Frank said. "Isn't it?" Ethan asked. "Tom abused his position of power. He created an environment where employees didn't feel safe. He violated the trust you placed in him when you made him a VP. The fact that his misconduct was interpersonal rather than financial doesn't make it less serious. If anything, it makes it more serious because it affected real people's daily lives." Frank went quiet. Another board member spoke up. "What happens to the employees who experience this? How do we make this right for them?" "You can't make it right," Ethan said bluntly. "The damage is done. But you can show them you take their experiences seriously. You can offer support, counseling resources, transfers to different departments if they want them, assurance that speaking up won't harm their careers. And you can demonstrate through Tom's termination that this behavior has consequences." The vote was unanimous. Tom Hendricks was fired the following day. 2 weeks later, Richard called Ethan with an update. "We've implemented new reporting protocols," he said. "Anonymous hotline, third-party oversight, mandatory training for all managers. We're also conducting a full cultural review to identify other potential problems before they escalate." "That's good," Ethan said. "But the real test will be whether employees believe anything has actually changed. Cultural shifts take time." "I know," Richard said. "But Ethan, I want to thank you, not just for the consulting work, but for showing us that doing the right thing doesn't have to destroy the company. We were so afraid of the legal exposure that we almost forgot about our responsibility to our people. You reminded us what matters." After the call ended, Ethan sat at his desk, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just quiet certainty that he was doing the work he was meant to do. The success with Jennifer's company led to more inquiries. A tech startup in California needed help building ethical reporting structures from the ground up. A nonprofit in Boston wanted guidance on handling allegations against a board member. A law firm in New York asked Ethan to consult on a major employment discrimination case. His calendar filled up, his bank account stabilized, and his sense of purpose deepened with every engagement. But the most meaningful work came from the individuals who continued to reach out. People like Michelle and Rachel, who needed someone who understood what they were facing, who could offer both practical advice and emotional support. Ethan started hosting monthly virtual support groups for people navigating workplace misconduct situations. The meetings were small, informal, confidential. Sometimes they talked about legal strategies. Sometimes they just talked about how exhausting it was to fight systems designed to wear them down. And every session, someone would say the same thing. Thank you for showing us this is possible, for proving we're not alone. One evening, after a particularly heavy session where a woman had broken down describing her employer's retaliation, Ethan received a message from Angela Torres. Hey, Ethan, I know it's late, but I wanted to tell you something. The class action suit against Meridian settled today. 12 women received compensation. The company admitted to systemic failures in handling harassment complaints. Policy changes are being implemented. It's not everything we wanted, but it's something. And it wouldn't have happened if you hadn't spoken up first. Thank you for that. Thank you for making space for the rest of us to be heard. Ethan stared at the message for a long time. Then he typed back, You did the hard part. You had the courage to come forward, to join the fight, to demand accountability. I just opened a door. You walked through it. Be proud of that. Angela's response was immediate. I am. And I hope you're proud of what you've built. You turned something terrible into something that matters. That's not nothing. Ethan set his phone down and looked around his home office. The desk he'd bought when he started the consulting practice, the bookshelves filled with texts on organizational psychology and workplace ethics, the whiteboard covered in notes from his current projects. This was his life now. Not the life he'd planned, not the life he'd imagined when he married Lauren, but it was his, and it mattered. 6 months after launching his consulting practice, Ethan received an unexpected invitation. Dr. Chen was hosting a symposium on workplace accountability and institutional reform. She wanted Ethan to be a keynote speaker. You've been doing this work for months now, she said over coffee at their usual meeting spot. You've helped organizations change their practices. You've supported dozens of individuals through impossible situations. People need to hear your perspective, not as a victim, but as someone who's building solutions. I don't know if I'm ready for that, Ethan said. Speaking publicly, putting myself out there like that. Why not? Dr. Chen asked. You've already been through the worst of it. The media coverage, the public scrutiny, the personal attacks. What's left to be afraid of? Ethan thought about that. Failure, I guess. What if I get up there and can't articulate what I want to say? What if I don't have anything valuable to contribute? Then you'll be human, Dr. Chen said gently. Nobody expects perfection, Ethan. They expect authenticity, and you have that in spades. Ethan agreed to think about it. That night he called Jamie. Dr. Chen wants me to speak at a symposium, he said, about workplace accountability, institutional reform, all the stuff I've been working on. That's great, Jamie said. What's the problem? I'm terrified, Ethan admitted. Of what? Of standing up in front of a room full of people and talking about the worst thing that ever happened to me, like it's some kind of teaching moment, of reducing my marriage, my divorce, everything I went through into a case study, of being defined by this forever. Jamie was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You know what I think? I think you're afraid that if you do this, if you step fully into this new identity, you'll have to let go of the old one completely. You'll have to accept that the life you thought you were building with Lauren is really, truly over, and that's scary. Ethan felt his throat tighten. Yeah, it is. But Ethan, Jamie continued, that life already ended. The moment Lauren made her choices, that future disappeared. You can't get it back, but you can build something new. And from where I'm sitting, you already have. You've built something meaningful, something that helps people. Why not own that? What if I'm not ready? You'll never be ready, Jamie said. Nobody's ever ready for the things that matter. You just do them anyway. Ethan laughed softly. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise, Jamie said. You've just been too busy to notice. The next morning, Ethan called Dr. Chen and accepted the invitation. Miss. The symposium was held at a downtown conference center 3 months later. Ethan arrived early, his notes clutched in one hand, his anxiety humming just beneath his skin. The room was already filling up. Academics, HR professionals, nonprofit leaders, policy advocates, people who spent their careers thinking about the issues Ethan had lived through. Dr. Chen found him backstage. How are you feeling? Like I'm about to throw up, Ethan admitted. She laughed. That's normal. But Ethan, these people aren't here to judge you. They're here to learn from you. Just tell your story. Tell them what you've learned. That's all you need to do. When it was time, Ethan walked onto the stage, his heart pounding. He looked out at the audience, hundreds of faces, all watching him, waiting, and then he began. My name is Ethan Parker, and 18 months ago I discovered my wife was having an affair with her boss. That discovery set off a chain of events that destroyed my marriage, exposed corporate misconduct at a major consulting firm, and ultimately led me here. I'm not an expert in organizational psychology. I'm not a lawyer or a policy analyst. I'm just someone who lived through a situation that shouldn't have been possible and who decided that staying silent would make me complicit in a system I knew was broken. He told them about Chicago, about the investigation, about the choice to go public, about the personal cost and the systemic change that had followed. And then he talked about what he'd learned since. The thing about accountability, Ethan said, is that it's never just personal. When someone abuses power, they're not just harming the individual they target. They're harming everyone who sees it happen and decides it's safer to stay quiet. They're harming the institution that protects them. They're harming the culture that says some people matter more than others. Real accountability requires more than punishing bad actors. It requires building systems where abuse can't thrive in the first place. He talked about the organizations he'd worked with, the individuals he'd supported, the changes he'd seen when institutions chose to prioritize people over liability. I can't fix every broken system, Ethan concluded, but I can show people that change is possible, that speaking up matters, that accountability isn't just some abstract ideal, it's something we can build, one decision at a time. And that's what I'm committed to doing, for as long as it takes. The applause was immediate and sustained. When Ethan walked off stage, Dr. Chen was waiting with tears in her eyes. That was perfect, she said. You gave them exactly what they needed. I was terrified the entire time, Ethan admitted. I know, Dr. Chen said, but you did it anyway. That's courage. In the months that followed, Ethan's work continued to grow. The symposium speech led to more speaking invitations. Organizations reached out asking for consulting support. Advocacy groups invited him to join their boards. And slowly, steadily, Ethan built a life that felt purposeful and whole. He still had hard days. Days when he thought about Lauren, about the life they'd lost, about the trust that had been broken. Days when the loneliness felt overwhelming. But those days became less frequent. And when they came, Ethan had learned to sit with them without letting them consume him. One afternoon, almost 2 years after everything had started, Ethan received an email that made him pause. The sender was Lauren. He almost deleted it without reading. He'd moved on. She was part of his past, not his present, but curiosity got the better of him. Ethan, I know I have no right to reach out. I know you probably don't want to hear from me. But I saw your speech from the symposium. Someone posted it online and I watched it. I wanted to tell you that I'm sorry, not because I think it changes anything, but because it's true. I made terrible choices. I hurt you in ways I can never undo. And I've spent the past 2 years living with the consequences of those choices. I lost my career. I lost my reputation. I lost you. And I deserve all of it. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I see now what I couldn't see then, that you deserved better, that you always deserved better. I hope you found peace. I hope you've built something good from the wreckage I created. You deserve that. Lauren. Ethan read the email 3 times. He felt nothing, no anger, no grief, no residual longing for what might have been. Just a distant sadness for 2 people who'd once loved each other and hadn't known how to keep that love alive. He thought about responding, about telling Lauren that he'd forgiven her, or that he hadn't, or that forgiveness wasn't the point. But in the end, he closed the email without replying. Some chapters didn't need closure. Some stories just ended, and that was okay. He'd built something new, something that mattered, and that was enough. 3 years after that night in Chicago, Ethan stood in front of a different hotel, this one hosting a conference where he was the featured speaker on workplace ethics reform. He thought about the man he'd been that night, standing outside room 1247 with roses and a shattered heart. That man had felt broken, lost. like his entire world had collapsed and he'd never find his way back. But standing here now, Ethan realized something profound. He hadn't found his way back. He'd found a different way forward. The old life, the marriage, the suburban dream, the future he'd planned with Lauren was gone. It had been an illusion built on trust that turned out to be misplaced. But what he'd built in its place was real, solid, his. He'd turned his pain into purpose, his betrayal into advocacy, his worst experience into something that helped others survive their own worst experiences. He'd found his integrity, his voice, his courage. And he'd learned that sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to let the worst thing that ever happened to you be the last thing that defines you. Ethan walked into the hotel, ready to speak, ready to build, ready to keep fighting for accountability, one conversation at a time. Because in the end, that was what mattered. Not revenge, not closure, not even justice in the abstract sense. What mattered was showing people that speaking up was possible, that institutions could change, that accountability wasn't just a concept, it was a practice, a choice, a commitment. And Ethan Parker had made that commitment, not just for himself, but for everyone who came after him, for Angela Torres, who'd found her voice, for Michelle and Rachel, who'd found their courage, for the organizations learning that protecting people mattered more than protecting profits, for the systems slowly, painfully beginning to change. That was his legacy now. Not the marriage that had failed, but the lives that had been touched, the institutions that had reformed, the culture that was shifting, one honest conversation, one brave decision, one act of accountability at a time. And standing there, about to step onto another stage, Ethan finally understood what Jamie had been trying to tell him all those months ago. He'd lost everything he thought mattered, and in losing it, he'd found something better. He'd found himself.